I'm Eli Gold, president of the Gold Institute for International Strategy here in Washington, D.C. We're about 6 days out from the 2020 presidential elections, where President Donald Trump is seeking a second term, and former Vice President Joe Biden is seeking to unseat him. In typical elections, you have two candidates, each with a different vision for the country, each feeling that they are the best suited to lead this country further. However, in this election cycle, we have a slightly different situation. And rather than having two competing candidates, we have two competing ideologies. Now, this is something that is so important for us to understand. And as we get to Election Day, which is this coming Tuesday, just 6 days away. You have, on one side, you have a candidate who is looking to further the opportunity of individuals here in America and limit government intrusion into our lives. Alternatively, you have a candidate who is seeking to further distance ourselves away from the vision that our founding fathers have had of limited government, of opportunity and self-determination. This is something that we have seen in the past. Now, you know, it's interesting. My 12-year-old son, who came home from school one day. Actually, I believe it was last week, after a very difficult day in his history class, and he says, "Listen, Dad, I don't understand. Why do I care about ancient governments, ancient civilizations? Do I really need to know what it was like in ancient Egypt or Rome or Greece? Do I have to understand the governments leading up until today? Maybe, in fact, all we care about, and maybe all I need to know is our current government and moving forward. What do I need to know about what things were like?" And I tried to explain to him that in order to move forward, you have to really have a good understanding of the past, of history. You know, one of the things that I like to do, like many people do, is I'm driving or going on my daily walk, listen to podcasts and speeches and whatnot. In a recent trip that I just took out to Michigan, so I was in the car for about 8.5 hours, I was listening to various different speeches. Now, one of the things that I like to do when I listen to these speeches, rather than listening to current speeches, although I do that as well, I like to listen to speeches from 10, 15, 20 years ago and even longer. And I like to compare what was happening then and what is happening today. In my last trip, I was listening to a speech by Ronald Reagan. This is in the 1960s. He was giving this speech for Barry Goldwater, the famous Time for Choosing. In my opinion, this seminal talk was what put Ronald Reagan on the path to the White House. And what I found to be fascinating about this speech, which I've listened to numerous times, is that if you were to take out the names and figures and numbers, you can say that exact speech today, and it would be quite relevant. At that time, Ronald Reagan was describing something very similar to what we have today. There was the idea of socialism or communism creeping into this country was a reality. It wasn't a possibility. This is something that Ronald Reagan set his life and career outside of Hollywood to defeat, and ultimately was successful at defeating the communism in the Cold War. But what we see today with one of our candidates is this idea of a democratic socialism. The question, of course, becomes, is this what our founding fathers envisioned? Is this what you want a group of intellectual elites in a far distant capital out in Washington, D.C., determining what is best for you. Our founding fathers didn't. One of our candidates doesn't. One of our candidates believes in self-determination and the idea that the private sector and the private individual understands better what is good for him, her, or in their district, better than what somebody in Washington may think for themselves. One of the things that I want to do, I want to play a clip of Ronald Reagan from his speech and see what your thoughts are on this, and see how relevant what was happening in the 1960s is relevant to November, Election Day 2020.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars. And it's been said if we lose that war, and in so doing lose this way of freedom of ours, history will record with the greatest astonishment that those who had the most to lose did the least to prevent its happening. Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers.
Do we still remember this? We see great debate in this in Washington, on the radio, in the media. We see riots in the streets. Each one suggesting that a democrat socialism is what's best for this country. But is this what our founding fathers envisioned for us? Is this what our founding fathers envisioned for you and I? And I would tell you, they did not. The question becomes, what can we do about it? And when we looked at on Election Day in 2016, it was a foregone conclusion that one candidate was going to win over the other, and it appears to be that way as well. But I suspect that if we can go out on Election Day this year in 2020, we can see we have the opportunity for self-determination. President Reagan went on to say,
not too long ago, two friends of mine were talking to a Cuban refugee, a businessman who had escaped from Castro. And in the midst of his story, one of my friends turned to the other and said, "We don't know how lucky we are." And the Cuban stopped and said, "How lucky you are. I had some place to escape to."
Recently, I had a conversation similar to the one that Ronald Reagan was describing in that talk, where somebody said to me, "What happens if we end up down the path of Venezuela? What country should we run to? Maybe we're going to have to. Maybe I need to make sure that my children have their passports so we can leave." Now, for Jews of Europe recently, there has been a great movement from leaving France and elsewhere within Europe to Israel. But I tell you that this election is not just about the future of the United States, but this election is actually about the future of the world. Think about this. Without the United States, what country can you go to that you would feel comfortable? Most countries across the globe are safe and secure because they know that the United States will come to their aid when necessary. That could be economically or militarily. Just knowing that the United States is there is what these countries count on. That being said, if the United States isn't, where are you going to run? There is no place, just like this Cuban refugee in Ronald Reagan's story. This election is so important for us to get out and go vote. This election is not just about you. It's not just about me. This election is not just about our country. This election is about our future and the future of the globe. With that, I ask that everybody go vote on Election Day and to do the right thing.